You know Jump, you know Panama. But did you know Eddie Van Halen could rock as hard with a power drill as he could a guitar? Here's everything you didn't know about Van Halen's iconic Guitarist. When Eddie Van Halen emigrated to the US from the Netherlands in 1962, English was not his first language. He and his brother Alex endured all kinds of bullying at the hands of school kids who saw them as different due to their background. During a 2015 audience Q&A at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., Eddie described his first day of school in America as absolutely frightening.
They would tear up my homework papers, make me eat playground sand.
Unfortunately, the Van Halen brothers had also experienced something similar in their homeland. They'd suffered racist abuse in Europe as the children of Dutch and Indonesian immigrants. Across the pond in sunny California, the language barrier only gave more fodder to their bullies. The school, Eddie said, was still segregated at the time, and because he and his brother couldn't speak English, they were considered a minority. Today, Eddie Van Halen is known as one of the great guitar heroes of the 70s and 80s, but he actually began his musical journey on the piano. Both Eddie and Alex were instructed in classical piano from a young age, and Eddie won several consecutive piano competitions after the Van Halens arrived in Southern California. In a 2009 interview with Forbes, he said, "I took piano lessons from the age of 6 when we lived in Holland. When we moved to America, it was just the typical thing, except I was really good at it. So was my brother. I actually won 3 years in a row at Long Beach City College." In the end, Van Halen turned to the drums and then the guitar after hearing the Dave Clark 5.
Immediately we said, okay, enough piano.
His piano skills came in handy in the long run, however. He contributed keyboards to several of his band's hits, such as Jump and Right Now. Eddie Van Halen was always open about the fact that he never learned to read sheet music. This might seem strange for a professional musician, but it's also been true for a number of other legends over the years, including Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, and all 4 Beatles. Van Halen had a finely trained ear that helped him mimic the sounds he heard and translate them to guitar. He had learned to do this when he took piano lessons as a young boy, playing by ear and watching his instructor's finger movements to map out his performances. According to Van Halen, he did this so effectively that he was able to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Speaking to Forbes, he said, "Nobody ever knew that I couldn't read music. I fooled everyone because they always tripped. They're going, how come you're not looking at the sheet music? I was just blessed with good ears." During Van Halen's rise to stardom in the late 1970s, Eddie Van Halen had a unique nickname among his bandmates, Vard. According to David Lee Roth, the backstory behind the name was one of family ties, coined in honor of Van Halen's mother, Eugenia. However, Van Halen's special nickname served a different purpose when the rock outfit was out on the road together. In conversation, it helped Roth and the rest of the band differentiate the guitarist from Roth's security guard at the time, who was also named Ed.
His mother used the Dutch expression, or Dutch, the way she said it was Dutch. Et wat? Et wat?
Eddie Van Halen found a whole new audience for his music when he contributed the guitar solo to Michael Jackson's iconic 1982 Thriller track Beat It. But this almost didn't happen at all, according to Toto keyboardist David Paich, who contributed synthesizers and arrangements on Thriller. That's because the members of Van Halen had a rule stipulating that nobody would play on session material outside of their own band. For this reason, Van Halen was initially reluctant to play on Beat It, and he almost missed his chance entirely when the song's producer Quincy Jones called him on the phone. Paich later told the Broken Record podcast, "So when Quincy called Van Halen and said, 'This is Quincy Jones,' he goes, 'Yeah, sure,' and hung up on him." Luckily, Van Halen quickly realized his mistake and sent a tape in. Jackson and Jones liked it, dropped it into their song, and the rest is history. While unknown to Van Halen fans upon its release, it later emerged that Eddie Van Halen had played drums on 1998's Van Halen 3, the band's only album with Gary Cherone as lead singer. Alex Van Halen, the band's mainstay drummer, didn't contribute to the album as he was going through his second divorce at the time. In a respectful nod from Eddie, however, Alex is still listed as the drummer in the album credits. But the album's producer Mike Post made no bones about Alex's absence when asked about it in 2024. Speaking on an episode of the Hustle podcast, Post explained that Alex was drinking to excess during his messy divorce, the impact of which came to a head during a recording session at Eddie's recording studio. Post recalled Eddie saying,
"Well, I want him to think about himself and his family and to get straight and to figure things out and get his divorce finished."
It might sound crazy now, but Van Halen almost changed their name mid-career. The proposed name change was pushed by the group's record label, Warner Brothers Records, when Van Halen first swapped lead singers in 1985. Original lead singer David Lee Roth had left Van Halen to pursue a solo career, and Sammy Hagar became the outfit's new singer. Certainly, it would have been a risky move. Speaking about Eddie and Alex's reaction to the idea, Michael Anthony later recalled,
"We were at Warner Brothers and they were yelling, going, hey, this is our last name. This is our careers, and we're this is it." Van Halen.
Put on Van Halen's 1991 studio album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and you'll hear something strange. The opening track, Pound Cake, begins with something that sounds like an overpowered dentist's drill, subtly morphing into Eddie Van Halen's unmistakable shredding. That's because the sound indeed comes from a drill, a power drill to be exact. While experimenting in the recording studio, Eddie and his audio engineer devised this aggressive, uncharted guitar sound by having Eddie play his guitar with a power drill, specifically by placing the tool close to his guitar's pickups. What came out of the speakers is now considered a canonized rock intro among the Van Halen faithful, subsequently calling the experiment a goofball little thing. Eddie addressed his power drill playing in Kevin Dodd's book Edward Van Halen, a definitive biography. He explained, "The motor of the drill got picked up by my guitar pickup, just like a microphone. I turned my volume on, and it sounded like kickstarting your engine." In 2015, Eddie revealed that the drill had been left sitting around by the studio maintenance technician, which led to Eddie picking it up and putting it to use. Eddie even used the same drill when Van Halen played the song in concert. One famous story about Eddie Van Halen demonstrates the respect he had for other pioneering rock and metal guitarists. He gave one of his Van Halen guitars to the late Pantera guitarist Dimebag Darrell Abbott so that Abbott could be buried alongside it. Abbott died in 2004 when he was murdered by an audience member during a performance with his post-Pantera band Damage Plan.
It just went crazy and started shooting people.
For guitar enthusiasts, Van Halen was renowned for his guitars striped and crisscrossing red, white, and black layers, but Abbott had always preferred Van Halen's black and yellow striped guitar, as pictured on the back cover sleeve of 1979's Van Halen 2. Speaking to Billboard in 2014, Abbott's widow, Rita Haney, said, "Eddie called to see if he could do anything for us and for Dime. So I asked him if he'd stripe up a guitar for Darrell. He said, 'One of the red, white, and black ones?' And I said, 'No, Darrell always said that the yellow and black was your toughest guitar.' And Van Halen gladly obliged with the axe, saying, 'An original should have an original.'" Eddie Van Halen never hid the fact that he had a history of tobacco, drug, and alcohol misuse. He entered a drug rehabilitation program in 2007 and remained sober for the rest of his life. But while some may speculate that Van Halen's later health problems may have resulted from his previous addictions, he has offered up his own theory as to why he was diagnosed with tongue cancer in 2000, and it all revolves around his guitar picks. Speaking to Billboard in 2015, he said, "I used metal picks, they're brass and copper, which I always held in my mouth, in the exact place where I got the tongue cancer. But at the same time, my lungs are totally clear. This is just my own theory, but the doctors say it's possible." Van Halen underwent surgery for his tongue cancer in the early 2000s, which reportedly removed a third of his tongue. In 2002, he was declared free of the disease. Sadly, that wasn't to be the end of Van Halen's cancer journey. He would be diagnosed with both lung and throat cancer before his death in 2020. Eddie's son, Wolfgang Van Halen, is now the leader of his own rock band, Mammoth WVH, so named in honor of Wolfgang's father and Van Halen's music. When Van Halen was still a fledgling act in Southern California in the early 1970s, one version of the band went by the band name Mammoth. Wolfgang added his initials to the name for a slight twist to make it his own. In a 2021 interview with Billboard, he said, "Since I was a kid, my dad would tell me the story of the band and that it was called Mammoth. It was a three-piece with dad singing, so that's another connection I have with it. Just growing up, I was like, that's the coolest name. When I grow up, I want to call my own band that." And here we are. Aside from being close as family, Eddie and Wolfgang are also close musically. In 2007, when he was still only 16, Wolfgang replaced Michael Anthony as the bass player in Van Halen. The band essentially disbanded in 2020 following Eddie's death. Wolfgang premiered his new band later that same year with a debut single, Distance, which was dedicated to the memory of his dad.